Welcome to Around the Writer's Table, a podcast focusing on the crossroads of creativity, craft, and conscious living for writers of all ages and backgrounds. Your hosts are Gina, Melody, and KimBoo, three close friends and women of a certain age who bring to the table their eclectic backgrounds and unique perspectives on the trials, tribulations, and the joys of writing. So pull up a chair and get comfortable here around the writer's table.
Welcome back, listeners. You are at Around the Writer's Table podcast. We're recording episode 44, a historic moment for us because we have come fully around the creativity quest. We've wrapped up all 12 stages. Is it 12, Gina? Yeah,
it's
12.
10.
10. Okay, I can't spell and I can't count. That's all right. I'm a professional author, so that's that's true. All 10 stages of the creativity quest, and we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into that. Now, this isn't going to be a full review of every single phase of it, but we are going to give you some insight into what we've talked about, why you should go back and listen to some of the past episodes where we do deep dives into each one of these phases or stages. We're going to talk to Gina we're going to put her on the hot seat about how she came up with this, why, how it could be useful to you as a writer. So please stay tuned, as they say, so that we can give you some really great insights and thoughts about the value of the creativity quest as Gina has thought it up and put it out here in the world for us. As you may know, I am KimBoo York. I'm a professional author and a productivity coach for creatives. I run the 1 Million Words Club, which is a membership community on Discord. It's a positive, non-judgmental, encouraging space that works on people. It's like, oh, we're hammering on their heads. No, that encourages writers in their quest to find the right mindset, to find the right process for themselves, to engage with their own productivity on their own terms. So it's a great community. I'm really enjoying that. I've also got several fiction serials that are going on right now, fantasy serials. That's exciting for me. One of them's almost wrapped up, and then another one's just starting. So the writing life never ends. But I am a co-host here with my co-hosts, Gina and Melody. So Melody, why don't you give us a short introduction to yourself for any listeners who have not been by here before?
Thanks, KimBoo. I'm Melody, a scout. I'm an author, landscape designer, landscaper, gardener. Anything having to do with plants is my jam. So I wrote a book called Soul of the Seasons, available in most online bookstores. I help people find their sense of home by creating balance and harmony. That's me.
And you do. You're so insightful. Melody, are there any paperback copies of that book still available? Would people be able to get those? I know it's available on all bookstores online as a digital version.
My book?
Yeah, your book, the one you wrote. Yes.
Yes, it is available in print form, has been. So,
okay.
Yeah. And I offer autograph copies if you desire that. So you can contact me directly.
Awesome. Yeah, a lot more readers are buying paperback and hard copies these days.
Yep.
It seems to be an upswinging trend. So I just wanted to make sure that they were still available. And that brings us to you, Gina, the woman of the hour. Give us a short introduction for new listeners or people who may have possibly forgotten who you are. I can't imagine that, though.
Hello, listeners, and hello, KimBoo and Melody. It's good to see your faces. I am Gina Hogan Edwards. I'm a writing retreat leader. We have 1 to 2 wonderful retreats every year on St. George Island, where women come together and community and learning and supporting each other. I'm also a certified creativity coach. I'm an editor, and I'm working on a historical fiction set in 1968. I'm doing some experimentation with how to release that novel. I have a Substack. I also have a Medium page. I also have a page on a new platform that's called Ream, which KimBoo also has. She didn't mention that, but I'll give her a plug for that too. We do have
Oh,
Ream
thank you.
pages where we are serializing our fiction. So that
Mm.
is a very new venture for me, not quite such a new process for KimBoo, but I've been learning a lot from that. And um, hopefully you'll be hearing more about that in the future, but it's all kind of an experimentation, a little scary, a lot of fun, and we'll see where it goes.
I'm very excited for you anyway. And if you're not keeping up with her, then you should definitely give her a follow on Substack or Medium. I mean, that's the thing about these days, isn't it? That your writers need to be in the place where readers are. So that's what I
Mhm.
think our experimentations are all about. Yeah.
And
Yes.
as a reader, I just wanted to give a plug. As a reader and a subscriber to both of my co-hosts, I highly recommend, even if you're not a writer, it's entertaining and fascinating and filled with lots of good information. So,
Yeah, we've got a lot of crossing of the streams with because I write about productivity issues and we've
Mhm.
got fiction and we've got craft stuff. So yeah, please check us all out. We've got some great content out there for you to read. Today though, we're going to circle back around to the creativity quest. Gina, I'm going to kind of hand over the microphone to you, metaphorically speaking, because one of the things when we were talking about this particular episode, when we were planning this episode, is talking about, well, where did this come from? What is it? How did it come to be? How can people use it? What's the value of it? I mean, I see the value of it having talked about it for a long time, but let's just give readers or listeners, I should say, a little bit of inside background on where this is coming from for you.
Sure. Yeah, I would be happy to. And I also want to interject before I get to that how helpful it has been to me as the sort of creator of this framework to have this opportunity for us to talk about it on the podcast, for us to kind of work through what does that stage mean. Being able to do that in an interactive environment for me has been very helpful because a lot of this has been going on in my head for a long time.
Mm.
And then just putting together, the worksheets and talking about it within the framework of the seasons, which is Melody's jam, being able to sort of combine those two things has really helped me get very clear about what each of the stages represents, how the writer experiences it in the different ways that writers experience it, because we're all unique, and yet there are so many similarities about how we experience this creative journey. And so I just want to thank you both for giving me the opportunity to kind of put this out there in a different way by talking about it on the podcast.
Well, no problem here. I mean, it's been very insightful for me to go through
Mhm.
that, some of the things that we've gone through, which we're going to talk about later in this
Yeah.
episode as well. But yeah, it's been a minute. It's been an amazing journey.
Well, you
mm,
talked about putting me on the hot seat. I'm gonna put y'all on the hot seat because I got
Oh
some
no.
questions for you about the things that we've talked about over these last oh so many months. We started talking about the creativity quest all the way back on episode 18. That's where we gave the initial overview of what the 10 stages
Mm.
are. And then between 18 and now, we have talked about each stage in an episode, gone over what that stage means, what it represents, how the author experiences it. And then in a follow-up episode, we talked with Melody about how it fits into the seasons of our lives and how we experience the balances and the imbalances. So, what the Creativity Quest is, in case we have listeners who are just joining us for the first time, and as a reminder for others, it's a model or a framework, if you will, for how the artist experiences the creative journey. It's not craft or how to, but it's about the artist's life. All the ups, the downs, the hills and the valleys, and all the sideways turns that we take as we go through our experience of being an artist. And so this applies not only to writers, it can apply to any creative person, a dancer, a sculptor, a painter, whatever creative endeavor you're in. And it has come from the birth of it was as I was working with writers as an editor and as a coach, I began to see some similarities in the things that were both holding writers back and the way that writers nurtured themselves, the way they cultivated confidence, the way they might pull away when they were getting so close to where they hoped that they would be. And so just observing how that was going on with my clients. Also, observation of my writer friends. You all don't know it, but you've been part of the whole like laboratory as I watched both of you go through this journey.
It's like riders in the mists, you know?
Oh, yes. And also observations of myself, you know, as I've um, sort of created in my head what I want my writer's life to be like, and then trying to make that a reality for myself. And as I've gone through the writing process and how that's felt to me and where I've run into you know, resistance or other kinds of obstacles that have slowed me down, and where I've leaned into things that have felt good. So just kind of observation, um, my participation one-on-one with writers in their journeys, and how that has played out, has all fed into this framework, which is 10 stages. They are designated with names. Each stage has a name, but if you look at the first letter of each stage, it spells out the word creativity. So that's where this 10 stages come from. Now you ask, why would this be useful to somebody? You know, how does it apply to a writer? In a lot of the episodes, as we were talking about the stages, we talked about this as being, sometimes we called it a blueprint. Sometimes we called it a roadmap. I think the roadmap analogy is a really good one, because it supports an author in how they're going to get from here to there. You know,
Mm.
it's the whole experience as a writer from beginning to end, but it's also about defining where there is. So, you know, Becca Syme talks about building your author house and making sure you're building a house you want to live in. And so this is about defining what your house is and figuring out how to get to that place.
Mm.
KimBoo and I were talking yesterday about what we were going to talk about on this episode, and something that she said to me really rang true for me, and I felt it as a major endorsement of what this framework is about. She said that the creativity quest can be like your own personal coach, because it can help you understand what's happening as you're going through your author life. It can help you see what's important and what's not. It can help you see how to get to the next step, or why you're being held back at the step that you're at. And if you learn about this quest by listening to our podcasts, and you also follow through in listening to the episodes about the seasons of writing, when we talk about each of the stages in relationship with the seasons of our lives, it really helps you see what the balances and the imbalances in each stage can be. And so then when you compare that with how you're experiencing your journey, it can really help you navigate the whole thing in a lot more elegant and hopefully fulfilling and satisfying and confident way.
Mm. I'm gonna, you know, you said roadmap, and one of the things, I think I've never really thought of it before. To me, it's almost like orienteering. Like, I'm sure Melody, you probably know what that is, but that is like people who just basically take like very basic compass and some other, and then they just try to find their way through the wilderness to a spot, a goal,
Mhm.
and it's a little bit of adventuring. It's a little bit of, you know, a little bit of risky, because you risk getting lost. You know where you want to go, but you're not following a trail to get there. You're
Yeah.
orienting yourself through the forest and the wilds to get to where you want to go. And that does seem to be the writing experience for a lot of people. And I love the thought of like the creativity quest is kind of like the orienteering guide. It's like, oh, well, if you're lost, look at this thing. And if you're feeling, you're up against a cliff, here to take a look at this and analyze where you are and what direction you're going. So
I love that.
that just came to me while you were talking.
Well, I love that too. And in fact, in Soul of the Seasons, I wrote about, this being a map.
Mhm.
And because I love that analogy too. There's some important things about having and using a map. A map helps you understand the terrain ahead.
Mhm. Mhm.
But one of the most important things is knowing where you are on the map.
Mm.
And both
Mm.
the Creativity Quest and the 5 Seasons of the Writing Process helps us understand where we're at. That's one of the most useful things I found out about the Creativity Quest is, here's where I am. Here's what's happening.
Mhm.
I mean, it just
Yeah.
made sense of a lot of what I was going through, what I continue to go through.
Mhm.
Well, one of the things that we've talked about over and over, and I can't repeat it enough. I know you listeners who've been around for a while have heard this, but our journey is not linear. And even
Mm.
though for the purposes of this podcast, we had to talk about each of the stages in a particular order. And, when I've written about it, I've written about them in an order, that spells out the word creativity with the first letter of the names of the stages. There is no order. We experience this all in our own unique ways. We loop back sometimes to repeat certain stages. Sometimes especially once we become a more seasoned writer, we may return to a stage that we've been to before and go, wait a minute, I don't need to repeat this stage. And so you might, move beyond that to one of the other stages.
Mhm.
And so I just want to re-emphasize that it isn't a linear process. And I love the idea of the orienteer. How did you say that?
Orienteering. Orienteering.
Orienteering. That's a tongue twister, but I love that concept. And I do think that at least when we know where we are, it gives us a grounded place from which to decide where we want to go.
Mhm.
But there is also, especially in the climate of publishing and writing as it is now, where everything seems to change on a daily basis almost, there
Oh,
is this
man,
sort
yeah.
of need to lean into the adventure and the not knowing where something might lead you, which is kind of where I
Mhm.
am right now with experimenting with all these different ways of putting writing out there. Is I don't know where any of it's going to lead, but just being able to lean into that experimentation and that adventure, and that's what the quest is all about, I think.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
So I would love to know from both of you all, first of all, based on our discussions over these oh so many episodes, I guess 24 plus, if you count the ones that we've added in for the seasons of the writing process discussion as well, how does what we've talked about match or maybe not match to your experience as a writer? Melody, you want to go first?
Um, I would say it matches most of the time my experience. I do notice both in when I was writing and developing Soul of the Seasons and then further expanding on that and the writing 5 seasons of writing process, there were certain phases or stages that were not as familiar to me or that I didn't realize how important they were. Like
Mm,
yielding to mastery comes to mind. Um,
mm,
and recognizing how important that was to include that in the process. So most of it made a lot of sense. Like I said, it 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 was sort of light bulb moments. Like, oh, that's what's going on
Mhm.
now.
Yeah.
So, and
excellent.
then again, it wasn't didn't seem chronological, but oftentimes when I look back, it was, kind of going in the way it was set up. It just doesn't seem
Mhm.
about it at the time, so I have to remember not to be too attached of should A and then it should B. It's like, where am I at right now? Right. Where am
Mhm.
I at right now? And what do I need while I'm here? And the important thing is to remember to not be attached or stay in any one phase too long. That's called getting stuck.
Yes,
Mhm,
for
mhm.
sure. Thank you, Melody. What about you,
Mhm.
KimBoo?
Well, I think we've hammered a lot on, as you said, the fact that it's not a linear process. But one of the things that really struck me as we worked through a lot of these stages is that the way that you've structured it may not necessarily be linearly followed all the time, but say a specific point where you're at, whether it's like carrying in or disquiet or releasing, or looking at my cheat sheet now because I can't keep it. Yeah, assessing and acknowledging. They're related to the ones before and after. So there's like this
Mhm.
network. I mean, I think that was a big aha moment for me, was realizing, okay, if I'm at the assessing and acknowledging stage, which was episode 25 is when we talked about that one, there's lots of different ways you can go and you can skip around. But for me, when I was looking at the stage before it and looking at the stage after it, kind of told me where I was. It
Mhm.
was very interesting to me how that was set up. So I know that you didn't uh mean for it to be used linearly, but those relationships are important in that kind of orienteering of, well, like, where am I now and
Mhm.
where am I going? I really can't say that I thought that anything didn't match my experience. I think there were parts of it I didn't relate to as much, but I think
Mhm.
that's on a per individual basis.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the emulating, and as we were talking about this, I was looking over the emulating and mirroring episode, which was episode 22. That one hit home for me. That's the one I remember the best, us talking about, because that is one where I get stuck. The two stages I get stuck at is carrying inner disquiet, and being able to put a name to that was incredibly helpful for me. I don't think I've
Mm.
ever told you that, Gina, but there's been so many times where I just stew on a story idea until it just dissipates, or until something else happens and I never get to that story. And it was because I was just carrying that inner disquiet and not releasing it and moving on to the next stage I needed to move on to. So being
Mm.
able to put a name to that was very important for me, so I could actually identify when it's happening to me. But the emulating and mirroring one was really, really important because I spent so much of my life emulating and mirroring that I wasn't taking the next step of ownership of my own voice and using what I learned from emulating and mirroring. So it's kind of like the dark side of emulating mirroring is you just start copying other people's style and you
Yeah.
just start riffing on it and not finding your own voice, which is
Mhm.
something that I got stuck in for, I think, decades. I was trying so hard to do it the right way and follow what other people were doing that I wasn't taking the lessons that were being given to me, handed to me by the universe, and utilizing them for myself. So
Mhm.
those were some of my big takeaways from us as we went through this whole process.
I'm glad you brought up emulating and mirroring because it's not my favorite stage, but it's one of my favorite ones to talk about because we don't give that stage enough credit for the potentiality of it. I just finished reading a bio of the author, and he was a professor at UF, Harry Crews. And there are several examples in that, including Harry Crews himself, who took novels, Faulkner, Steinbeck, and hand wrote them as a way to learn about pacing and sentence structure and sentence length. And that's something that we don't talk about enough in the writing arena. You've got, dancers do and pianists, they rehearse, and they play
Mhm.
the works of other people in order to learn the skills of whatever their craft is. And in writing, we don't talk about that enough, and I don't think we give it enough credit. So
Mm.
that's enough about that one particular stage. The
We
other
save
thing
that
that
for a future episode.
yes, yes. I love
Okay.
talking about that one because I think there's so much value in it. And people think of emulating and mirroring as a bad thing. You're copying somebody, and that's not what that stage is really about. I mean, that's an aspect of it, of course. But one thing that came to mind in listening to both of you was looking back on our discussions and the writers that I've worked with. I think the linearity of the process most likely to show up with newer writers? And I could be wrong about that. I'm still exploring this whole framework myself too, but it just seems like the possibility of traveling the quest in the way that we've talked about them in the order of the stages would be most likely for newer writers. And then as the writer gets more experience and they start to go through this quest again, because we do repeat, there are going to be times when they're going to skip stages or, loop back and get stuck in a stage. I tried one time to map out the possibilities for each stage. Where is the writer most likely to go to next? And I ended up with this really complicated, like floral pattern.
Like a spiralgram, like remember those spiralgram things that we did? It's like, oh, it's just a big circle, 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 circle.
Actually, if I could find a spirograph, that might be a good thing to help me kind of work that out. Because I don't know if it's possible because, we're complex creatures and our journeys are unique. So I don't know if that's possible to do that, but I'd love to try it. There are other models or frameworks. A lot of people are familiar with Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. There's also The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Twyla Tharp has a book called The Creative Habit. So there are a lot of other books that talk about creativity and the quest. So I just want listeners to be aware that this is just another way that they can look at their own life and their own experience as a writer to, kind of see where they are and to support themselves in getting to the next step. And maybe the creativity quest is helpful to them. And I'd love to hear about that if it is, but there are other models out there that writers can, explore as well that may match their experience a little better. I don't want to presume that this is like the perfect paradigm. So you touched on this a little bit already, KimBoo, in mentioning emulating and mirroring, but I want to know what parts of the creativity quest kind of spoke to you the most. And since you did talk about emulating and mirroring, KimBoo, I'm going to go to Melody on this question. Melody, was there something in particular about this cycle, this process that spoke to you the most?
Well, I had a couple ones that stuck out, but every time we talk about a particular one, I go, oh, yeah, that one was really important. Oh, yeah, that was so valuable.
That's the nature of the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say accessing and acknowledging was
Ooh, interesting.
really helpful to me. The part about finding my voice, I had this moment, Gina and I shared a moment when I was writing Soul of the Seasons where she said, you have found your voice.
Oh, wow.
And it was actually quite emotional for both of us. I felt like I landed, I felt like it felt like a place of home. Because when I first wrote it, Soul of the Seasons is based on 5-element medicine, part of traditional Chinese medicine, which is very rich and complex and elaborate system. That makes a lot of sense, but it's very complex. And so when I was writing, I could just write forever, but we don't want a 2,000-page book. And so I threw in everything but the kitchen sink during my first draft. After the beta readers that helped me pare things down a little bit, went through another iteration and another beta reader, which helped me really solidify and clarify what the strengths were and paired that out. And then, we both, it was like a exhale. This is it. This is the track I need to go on. So I found that phase extremely helpful to me. And the other one, inviting an authentic experience, which I feel like is part of the Soul of the Seasons, the 5 seasons process as well, both in my personal life, which reflects in my creative writing life. To be more authentic myself helps enable me to write more authentically.
Mm. Yeah, we talked about the first one you mentioned, assessing and acknowledging, which I also call assessing growth. And the listeners should be aware that as we've talked about this, and as I've written more about it since we began these podcast episodes, I've refined my own understanding of these. And so I'm working on what I'm calling each of the stages. And so assessing and acknowledging, I sometimes also refer to as assessing growth, but the acknowledging part is a really important aspect of it, because it's really a time when you sort of review what you've learned and you recognize the growth that has occurred. And I think that that was what happened in that moment where you and I went, you found your voice. And it's also about recognizing what you still have to learn. And so those beta readers were helping you recognize where else you needed to take that book.
Mhm.
So we talked
Mhm.
about that in episode 25. And then the other one that you spoke about, inviting authentic existence, and I also call inviting new perspectives, because that's on the side of the cycle where we have more external interaction. And so in that stage of inviting authentic existence is where you're stepping even further into being the authentic you, and into the opening that's been offered by all of these previous guideposts that you've been through, and where you're really starting to recognize your autonomy in your work. You're not doing the emulating and mirroring and relying on your mentors as much as you have in the past, and really being willing to step into even more of the exploration and risk taking to be yourself. And we talked about that one in 2 episodes because it was such an involved one. We ended up breaking it up into 2 parts. So we talked about inviting authentic existence in episode 29 and episode 32. So
Mm.
thank you, Melody. That's helpful. I appreciate that. KimBoo, was there anything you wanted to add beyond the emulating and mirroring stage?
Yeah, all of it. I'm kind of like, I'm just like, every time I look at one, oh yeah, that one. Oh, and that, yeah, that one, that one. I want to point back to episode 38, which was you originally used to call it 3 Feet from Gold, and then you put into trusting the process.
Mhm.
And I invite listeners to go listen to that episode particularly, because you will hear me have a mini breakdown. It's fun because that's so often something I've had to battle with. And understanding that it's not just something a lot of authors deal with, but it's often part of the whole process of writing, is that we get to this point of fighting our way through those last 3 feet to get to the goal of our story. Makes for a better story. But it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking, well, it's hard, and therefore that means it's not supposed to happen, or it's not supposed to be written about. And yeah, that one hit home for me in a lot of ways, as you know, Gina and Melody,
Yeah.
because you were there for me through all of that, and still are in a lot of ways. But I do that to myself a lot. So that particular episode I remember as well, and that's something I constantly tell myself every day, is trust the process.
Yes.
In my creative work, not just in life in general, but like in my creative work, trust the process. I think one of the things you said earlier about newer writers versus experienced writers is, I think more experienced writers have that intuition to fall back on that they've developed going through this cycle, through these different stages in whatever order they went through, so that at the point where we can come back to them, we can identify, oh yeah, I am stuck in emulating and mirroring. Oh, whoops, maybe I should try to find my own voice in this story. And so I think that's an important part of it. And when you get to 3 Feet from Gold, it's trust your intuition. Trust your intuition. Just trust it. Just do the thing. So yeah.
So I, for myself, So I'm going to be really vulnerable here.
Oh no.
And, I'm the timekeeper, so I'm watching the time. So I
Right.
saved this for the last minute for a reason. So I'm also, I am also, I don't even want to say it. I
Oh
have
my
been,
gosh, Gina, come on. We've got you. We're here for you.
okay,
This must
okay,
be good.
okay.
I know, right?
I've started writing about the creativity quest on Substack. And I will be honest that my intention was to write about each one of the stages each month. And y'all,
Mm.
I got stuck on releasing, which is right at the beginning of the cycle. And it's really been an interesting examination. Now, to be honest, I've had a lot of stuff go on in my life in the last couple of months. So that plays into
Fair.
it as well. But if I'm being truly honest with myself, the perfectionism and the imposter syndrome that I need to let go of has had me in its
Mm.
clutches in terms of talking about this, writing about this, which I find really interesting because we've been able to talk about it on the podcasts. But
Mhm.
when I sit down
Mhm.
to write
And
about
you've
it,
made worksheets. You've made worksheets for every just listeners, go back and listen to episodes because there are worksheets for every one of
yeah,
them on our website. Like you've done the work.
yeah. But when it gets, for some reason, when it gets down to writing about each one of the stages, I feel blocked. And I know because I've observed myself for so long. And this stage of releasing requires a lot of self-honesty. The whole dang cycle does. But it's the imposter syndrome and the perfectionism that's held me back. So having said that, it is my intention to write more about this, to explore this more. And once again, I'm going to circle back to what I said at the beginning. I thank you ladies so much for giving me the opportunity to explore all of this through this podcast because it has helped refine it so many ways. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Well, it's been a journey for us as well. You're so welcome.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that because I often get stuck with that too. I got stuck with that a lot with Soul of the Seasons and why it took me 9 years to write it. Because it is an intricate and complex. I mean, we could expound on each one of these steps or even one segment of each one of these
Mm,
steps for literally ever. Um,
yes.
it's like, oh my God, how do I include? Well, how does this make sense? This is so big. How do I, you know, it is incredibly easy to make something simple complex, but it is really challenging to make something complex simple.
Yes.
Hmm.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
You said it,
And
girl.
Yeah,
Gina, you,
But I'm
yeah.
trying, so y'all bear with me, have patience with
I
me.
know
I
you
will
can do it.
continue to work on this because it's something that I truly believe can be helpful to authors, and I'm refining the additional resources and some
Mm.
exercises for each one of the stages, and, it's a work in progress, and it's gonna take me some time, but thank you for being along on the journey with me. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Oh, you could
We
go
are.
to that step, trust the process. Isn't that one of
Oh, there
those
you go.
Yeah,
That's one of those steps.
there we
Yeah.
go.
It's been good to be here with you for this journey because, yeah, I remember when you first started talking about this, and it's just you're very passionate about it. Listeners, if you haven't gone look at our credentials, Gina has many years of writing credentials, editing credentials, creativity coaching credentials, and experience to back it up. So she says she talks about imposter syndrome, and I'm just like, who, what, you, why? How could you possibly feel that way? Because you do have the experience to back up the advice and the insights that you have in this. So I, for one, am looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Mhm.
KimBoo, you wanna wrap us up because 'Cause we're hitting on the 40-minute
Oh,
mark.
wow. Yeah. Okay. I guess, well, we could just keep talking.
I know, we could easily.
Uh, but thank you so much, listeners, for joining us for this episode. We've got more interesting episodes up ahead. One of the things I'm looking forward to is I'm actually going to be doing one-on-one interviews with both Melody and Gina. Take us out of themes and take us out of topics and really dig down into y'all's process as writers. And so I'm going to put put you both on the hot plate. I'm looking forward to that. We've got more interviews coming up. Melody, you'll be doing an interview here with our next episode, I believe. Correct?
Yeah. My dear friend and writer and creative person extraordinaire, Karla Refogo. She is a fellow plant spirit medicine colleague, and we are going to talk about the book she created to go with her companion oracle deck and what that process was like for her. So I'm really excited about that interview.
That's going to be really good. And and listeners, you're going to be getting more interviews like this coming forward with future episodes where we talk to other people about writing and their experiences. So definitely subscribe, hit the like button, blah, 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 hit the little heart, whatever on your app. We are on Spotify. We're also on YouTube. So check us out anywhere. But if you want the worksheets that go with all the creativity quests and you want to listen to older episodes, go to our website, aroundthewriterstable.com, all one word, aroundthewriterstable.com. With this episode, we will have a short guide listing out all the different previous episodes. It's a lot. Maybe we could make that into like a little download instead, sure. Gina, instead of having like 5,000 word show notes.
Yeah.
So we'll have that as a handout, which you can look at. So you as a guide to previous episodes on this topic. And we also have a comment. Melody's always reminding me. She's like pointing at me. We have a comment section there. You can leave a comment for us. Tell us who maybe you want us to interview. Thoughts on the creativity quest?
I like that.
If you go to our website, also links across the top to all of our own individual websites and the work that we do. So we appreciate you listeners tuning in, and we will talk to you again here around the writer's table. Thank you so much, and bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks for joining us around the writer's table. Please feel free to suggest a topic or a guest by emailing info@aroundthewriterstable.com. Music provided with gracious permission by Langtree. A link to their music is on our homepage at aroundthewriterstable.com. Everyone here around the writer's table wishes you joy in your writing and everyday grace in your living. Take care until next time.